A 50-foot yacht bobbed gently in the Whispering Pines community pool, its pristine white hull gleaming under the morning sun. Water sloshed over the pool's edges, creating small lakes across the previously immaculate patio. Karen Davenport, president of the Whispering Pines Homeowners Association, stood frozen at the gate, her morning clipboard inspection suspended in midair as her jaw hung open. "What in the name of proper lawn maintenance is that?" she whispered, though no one was around to hear. The yacht, named HOA's Nightmare, in freshly painted blue lettering on its stern, was far too large for the pool. Its bow nestled awkwardly against the shallow end steps, while its stern hovered precariously over the deep end. A half-empty bottle of expensive champagne sat on a deck chair beside the pool, along with a handwritten note that simply read, "From Jack Newman, Lot 37. Karen's blood pressure skyrocketed as she fumbled for her phone. Jack Newman was the bane of her HOA existence, a thorn in her perfectly manicured side since he moved into Whispering Pines 6 months ago. She stabbed at her screen with a trembling finger, nearly breaking a freshly done acrylic nail in the process. "Harold, it's me. Get the emergency board together now. And call that useless security company. Newman has gone too far this time." As she waited for responses, Karen paced the perimeter of the pool. This wasn't just a violation. This was a declaration of war. The community pool was her crowning achievement. She had personally selected the shade of blue for the bottom, had fought for the perfect pH balance, had written 17 separate rules governing its use. And now it contained a yacht. A yacht. 3 weeks earlier, Karen had led the charge to find Jack Newman for keeping his modest fishing boat in his driveway overnight, a clear violation of Section 7, Paragraph 12 of the HOA Covenant, which prohibited watercraft storage in visible areas. She had personally slipped the $250 fine notice into his mailbox with a surge of regulatory satisfaction. The next day, Newman had appeared at the monthly HOA meeting, arguing that his boat was essential for his weekend fishing trips with his son, who was recovering from leukemia. The fishing trips were therapeutic, he'd explained. The board, swayed by the story, had seemed ready to grant an exception. That's when Karen had pulled her masterstroke. She'd revealed photographs showing that Newman's boat was 3 inches longer than the small watercraft provision allowed. Rules were rules. The fine would stand and the boat would need to go. "The covenant exists for a reason," she had announced to the room. "Property values depend on uniformity and standards. Start making exceptions, and soon our beautiful community looks like a storage yard." She had locked eyes with Newman. "Perhaps you should consider a community better suited to your lifestyle." Now, as Karen completed her third lap around the pool, her phone began buzzing with messages from board members. Harold would arrive in 10 minutes, the others shortly after. Security was on their way. She allowed herself a small smile, already envisioning how she would describe this outrage at the emergency meeting. "This time," she muttered, taking a photo of the yacht as evidence, "he's done. Complete removal of membership privileges. Maximum fines, perhaps even legal action." As she zoomed in to capture the boat's name in her photograph, Karen noticed something else. A small gathering of neighbors had formed at the pool gate, pointing and laughing. Worse, someone was filming. "Move along," Karen shouted, her voice cracking slightly. "This area is closed due to vandalism." But they didn't move, and as Karen looked more closely, she realized with creeping horror that they were actually applauding. By noon, the yacht situation had escalated beyond Karen's worst nightmares. Local news vans crowded the community entrance, reporters clutching microphones as they interviewed residents about the HOA yacht incident. A police officer had arrived but merely shrugged, explaining that this was a civil matter. The towing companies Karen called all came to the same conclusion. Removing a 50-foot yacht from a pool required specialized equipment they didn't possess. "This is your fault," Harold whispered during an emergency board meeting in Karen's living room. "You pushed Newman too hard over that fishing boat." "My fault." Karen's voice rose an octave. "I was enforcing our rules. Rules that you all approved." She glared around her immaculate living room at the 5 other board members, all of whom suddenly seemed fascinated by her beige carpet. "The optics are bad, Karen," said Diane, the board treasurer. "Everyone knows about Newman's son. The community is calling you Yacht Karen on Facebook." "They're what?" Karen lunged for her laptop, fingers flying across the keyboard to the community group page. There it was, a photo of her standing open-mouthed by the pool, next to the yacht. The comments section bustled with activity. "Yacht Karen strikes again." Finally, someone stood up to the HOA tyrant. "Team Newman all the way." Worst of all was the post pinned at the top, a formal statement from Jack Newman himself. "After being fined for keeping a small fishing boat that helps my son's recovery, I realized my mistake. Clearly, Whispering Pines only allows large boats. I hope my new vessel meets with HOA's approval. I paid a $250 large boat fee to Ms. Davenport's mailbox this morning. The post got hundreds of likes. Karen slammed her laptop shut. This is character assassination and destruction of community property. We need to take immediate action. What do you suggest? Harold asked, his tone suggesting he already feared the answer. Full enforcement. Every violation, every home starting today. Karen reached for her emergency HOA binder, tabbed and color-coded. Newman has rallied people against us, but let's see how they feel when they're the ones being cited. The board members exchanged nervous glances. Diane ventured, maybe we should try de-escalation first. Speak with Newman privately. Absolutely not, Karen interrupted. Show weakness now and the entire covenant collapses. She began distributing violation notice forms to each board member. We inspect every property this afternoon. Document everything: grass height, unauthorized decorations, unapproved paint colors. Every infraction. By 3 o'clock, Karen had issued 17 violation notices, slipping them into mailboxes with grim satisfaction. House numbers painted in the wrong font, unapproved bird feeders, a garden gnome exceeding the permitted height by 2 inches. Each notice included maximum fines and referenced the specific covenant paragraph violated. As she marched up the path to her final target, Newman's house, Karen noticed a crowd following at a distance. Phones were out, recording her progress. She straightened her back and continued forward. Let them watch. Rules existed for a reason. Newman's house looked perfect, infuriatingly so. Fresh paint within approved color schemes. Lawn precisely 2.5 inches high. No visible violations whatsoever. Karen circled the property twice before spotting her opportunity. A single wind chime hanging from the porch, producing gentle notes in the afternoon breeze. Section 4, paragraph 3, she murmured triumphantly, filling out the notice. No audible decorations visible from the street. As she placed the violation in Newman's mailbox, applause erupted behind her, slow, sarcastic clapping. Karen turned to find Jack Newman himself standing on his front walk, surrounded by neighbors. Impressive dedication, Ms. Davenport, he said, loud enough for everyone to hear. May I ask what violation you discovered today? Karen lifted her chin. Wind chimes are not permitted in visible areas. Interesting, Newman nodded thoughtfully, because I distinctly remember seeing identical wind chimes on your own porch last weekend. The crowd murmured, and several people began walking toward Karen's house to verify. For the first time in her HOA presidency, Karen Davenport felt the ground shifting beneath her sensible shoes. The next morning, Karen awoke to a community in full rebellion. Overnight wind chimes had appeared on every porch in Whispering Pines, hundreds of them, tinkling in the morning breeze. As she stepped outside to retrieve her newspaper, the metallic symphony assaulted her ears from all directions. This is Newman's doing, she muttered, snatching the paper and retreating inside. But when she unfolded the local Gazette, her coffee cup froze halfway to her lips. There on the front page was a photo of the yacht in the community pool alongside the headline. How many of the well-many ASSO say ATIO and PRESIDNT faces basically over excessive enforcement. The article quoted several Whispering Pines residents, including Newman, who described Karen's tyrannical reign over the community. Worse, they'd uncovered her history at 2 previous homeowners associations, both of which had eventually voted her out. The journalist had painted her as a serial HOA despot, moving from community to community. Karen's phone began ringing. She silenced it without looking, her mind racing through damage control scenarios. This wasn't just about a boat anymore. This was about her reputation, her authority, her very identity as the upholder of community standards. By mid-morning, an emergency board meeting had been hastily assembled in the clubhouse. As Karen strode across the parking lot, she noticed something strange. Residents were out in their yards, watching her pass. Some nodded politely. Others turned their backs demonstratively. All had wind chimes. We need to call a special election, Harold announced without preamble as Karen entered the clubhouse. Excuse me. Karen felt her face flush. On what grounds? Loss of confidence, Diane said, sliding a document across the table. We've received a petition signed by over 70% of homeowners calling for new board elections. Karen scanned the petition, her finger trembling slightly as it traced down the long list of names. Neighbors she considered allies, friends she'd had over for dinner, people whose property values she protected through vigilant enforcement. This is Newman's doing, she repeated, this time to the board. He's manipulating everyone with his sad story and childish pranks. Actually, Harold said carefully, I think this is about more than Newman. People are tired of the constant surveillance, the petty fines, the threatening letters. We've lost sight of what makes a community. Without rules, there is no community. Karen slapped the table. Just chaos and declining property values. The special election is scheduled for Friday, Diane continued as if Karen hadn't spoken. Until then, all enforcement actions are suspended. Karen looked around the table at the board members, her board members, and saw no allies. Just people who'd lost their nerve, who didn't understand what it took to maintain standards. Fine, she said, icily gathering her things. If you want to surrender to anarchy, that's your choice. But don't come crying to me when property values plummet. As Karen marched home, a plan began forming in her mind. Clearly, diplomacy had failed. Her years of service and dedication meant nothing to these ingrates. If it wanted to make this personal, she could play that game too. She would find Duran Newman. Everyone had secrets, and she would use it to show the community who he really was. That evening, Karen spent hours online researching Jack Newman's past, former addresses, business history, court records. She was looking for anything she could use: a bankruptcy, a lawsuit, a failed business, something to discredit him before the election. Around midnight, she found what she was looking for 6 years ago. Newman had been involved in a bitter dispute with developers who wanted to build luxury condos in his old neighborhood, threatening a local wetland. Newman had led the resistance, organizing protests and filing injunctions that ultimately cost the developers millions. Environmental activist, Karen whispered, a smile spreading across her face. Let's see how that plays with our conservative community. But as she dug deeper, Karen's smile faded. Newman hadn't just fought the developers. He proposed an alternative plan that created affordable housing while preserving the wetland. He won awards for community service. The more Karen read, the more she realized that attacking Newman's character might backfire spectacularly. She needed a new approach, and it came to her just as she was about to give up. If she couldn't attack Newman personally, she would use his tactics against him. Fight spectacle with spectacle. Beat him in his own game. Karen picked up her phone and dialed a number she'd never thought she'd use: her cousin Roger, who owned a construction company. The morning of the special election arrived with an unexpected development: rain. Not just a sprinkle, but the kind of torrential downpour that meteorologists describe with terms like atmospheric river and precipitation event. By 9 a.m., Whispering Pines resembled a wetland more than a planned community. Karen stood at her living room window, watching water cascade down her carefully regulated French drain system. Her phone had been suspiciously silent since the previous evening's confrontation at the pool. No panicked calls from board members. No angry texts from residents. Just silence, which worried her more than outrage would have. The election was scheduled for 6 p.m. at the clubhouse. Karen had spent the night rehearsing her speech, preparing for every possible scenario. She would be reasonable but firm. Acknowledge missteps while emphasizing the importance of standards. Appeal to property values, always the trump card in HOA politics. At noon, her doorbell rang. Karen opened it to find Harold, soaked despite his umbrella, his expression grave. "You need to come see this," he said without preamble. "See what?" "I'm preparing for tonight's." "Now, Karen." Something in his tone silenced her objections. She grabbed her raincoat and followed him to his SUV. They drove in silence through the drenched community. Karen noticed sandbags appearing on porches, residents working together to redirect water away from foundations. As they approached the community pool, she saw emergency vehicles, their lights flashing against the gray downpour. "What's happened?" she asked, suddenly concerned. Harold parked at the clubhouse. The pool, the yacht, the rain. As they hurried toward the pool area, Karen's stomach tightened. Through the gate, she could see what had drawn the emergency response. The continued rain had raised the pool's water level until the yacht, already precariously balanced, had shifted. Its stern had crashed through the pool's concrete edge, creating a breach through which pool water was now flowing directly toward the clubhouse foundation. Fire department personnel were attempting to stabilize the situation, setting up pumps and barriers. A small crowd of residents huddled under the clubhouse overhang, watching the disaster unfold. "Insurance will cover this, right?" Karen asked, her voice small. Harold gave her a look. "Our policy specifically excludes damage caused by unauthorized watercraft. Your thorough coverage review last year, remember?" The weight of the situation crashed down on Karen. This wasn't just about an election anymore. This was potentially hundreds of thousands in damages that the HOA reserves couldn't cover, which meant special assessments, increased dues, angry homeowners. As she stood paralyzed by this realization, Karen spotted Jack Newman among the volunteers filling sandbags. Despite everything, he was here, helping. "How did this happen?" she whispered, more to herself than Harold. "The same way it always happens," Harold replied. "Step by step, escalation by escalation, until no one can remember how it started or why it mattered so much." Karen watched as Newman organized a human chain, passing sandbags efficiently from truck to barrier. Despite the rain and chaos, he worked methodically, directing others with calm authority. A strange feeling settled over Karen. something she hadn't experienced in years: shame. She had been so fixated on being right, on maintaining control, that she'd lost sight of the actual community she claimed to protect. These weren't just rule followers or rule breakers. They were people with lives and stories. Newman's son fighting leukemia, the elderly couple who needed help with yard maintenance, the single mother who worked nights and sometimes left her trash can out too long. Without conscious decision, Karen found herself moving toward the sandbag line, slipping in next to Newman. He glanced at her, surprise flickering across his face, but said nothing as he handed her a heavy sandbag. For the next 3 hours, Karen Davenport, HOA president, covenant enforcer, neighborhood watchdog, worked alongside the very people she'd been fighting. Her blazer was ruined, her manicure destroyed, her carefully styled hair plastered to her head by rain. And strangely, she didn't care. As the afternoon wore on, the rain finally began to slacken. The emergency crews had managed to stabilize the pool breach, though the yacht remained awkwardly tilted, its bow pointing skyward like a monument to hubris, both Newman's and her own. When the immediate crisis had passed, residents began drifting toward the clubhouse, where the election was scheduled to begin in less than an hour. Karen hung back, suddenly uncertain of her place. Newman approached, extending a bottle of water. "Quite a day," he said simply. Karen accepted the water. "Yes." They stood in uncomfortable silence for a moment. "Your speech ready?" Newman finally asked. Karen looked down at her mud-splattered clothes and laughed, a genuine, unexpected sound that surprised them both. "Not exactly." "Good," Newman nodded, "because I think we both have some rethinking to do." As the community gathered in the clubhouse murmuring about the day's events, Karen realized that whatever happened next would be nothing like she had planned.